very happy to have another guest here on Veil of Sound for an interview with us. And this time it's nobody else than the, unfortunately, not famous enough Dana Schechter. Dana, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
I've been a fan of your music for quite a few years now, and it was even more so when I found out on how many records and projects you have been without me noticing. Now you are on, I would say, another big label with Consouling Sounds. We'll come to the thing like what is special about it, but can you first tell us a little bit about how this collaboration with Consouling Sounds started?
Sure. It was as simple as that Insect Ark's manager, Nikos, got in touch with Mike from Consouling after Consouling had made an order of Insect Ark merchandise for their store. Last year, the Insect Ark tour for The Vanishing, which was the most recent full length, the tour was canceled after about a week. So we were on the road when COVID hit and had a lot of extra merchandise. So we did a sort of a sale on our own of just trying to really offload a ridiculous amount of merchandise. And so Mike made a really generous order for the shop. And we started chatting, and then Nikos and Mike started chatting, and then Nikos let Mike know that there was some archival material that was not published yet, and actually not mixed yet, that we've been planning to do something with for a few years. And it goes back a few years to when I was still doing some solo work, or it's referring more to the time when Insect Ark was a solo project completely. And so they started talking, and it pretty much just went from there.
So that is also the explanation, like why there is no Insect Ark release yet on Consouling Sound. But I think what you are describing is another perfect example of what makes this label in some ways so special, right? I mean, like,
well, they love to do things, it seems, where they're taking some of their love for music and they're not so worried about genres. They just are approaching it with this really positive attitude and love for the scene and the sort of family operation and a commitment to sound itself. And this is something that, for me, it's really inspiring.
I think this term that you just used, two of them actually, like love and family, I think that is something which is unique about them. I've spoken to Mike a lot in the last year, like Mike and Nele a lot of recently, and one thing that we also came up with, trust. Do you think that trust is another of those integral parts of Consouling Sounds? And the scene in general?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, trust, we all need trust to move forward with our lives and the decisions that we make. And we have to have it in ourselves, otherwise we're pretty lost.
It's interesting that you say trust in yourself. Do you also mean like trust in your own skills and abilities?
That, and also in making your way through life, you have to follow your instincts. Most of us aren't given a roadmap, and some of us aren't even parented in a traditional way, and we don't get the skill sets that we need to navigate through social situations or professional situations. And hopefully you develop trust in yourself so that you can use your brain to weave you through and negotiate all the good and the bad.
That is very interesting because it connects to something that I will also ask you later on. Do you think that trust is important in yourself is important so that you develop yourself as a person, or we as persons develop our own skills? Because you spoke about trust not being given, sometimes not being given by parents.
The question is do we need trust in ourselves to develop our skills? Absolutely. I mean, it's great if somewhere along the way in life somebody recognizes that you, let's say, have a special talent for something that could be engineering or something in the sciences or music or whatever, and that somebody says, hey, you know, I think you really have a gift with this and I want to encourage you to do that. That goes a really long way, and I'm sure you as a teacher really see this every day. But hopefully you also have a place within yourself where you can trust this feels good, this doesn't feel good. Nobody can define these things for us in our lives.
So you definitely should have a lot of trust in yourself and your abilities, because Insect Ark is a phenomenal project and the records have always been inspiring and very interesting. And you've already said it, at the beginning Insect Ark was kind of a solo project. I know that there were still people involved with some things, but more or less a solo project. Now on The Vanishing, it seems as if you have like a first real collaborator. How did you find your drummer?
Well, actually I have to step back because actually The Vanishing was the second album, the second full length with drums. Both of the full lengths that had live drums so far were released on Profound Lore. The first one was 2018, called Narrow Hymns. At that time, the drummer was Ashley Spungen.
Yeah.
And she was playing drums and doing some synthesizer work. She hand builds these synthesizers, and so she did some of that. And then Andy came in when she and I parted ways. So that was the second one. And how I find people, honestly, it's the same as how I've met everybody I've ever played with. You just meet people, you talk, you have a community. I was looking for a drummer initially when Ashley joined. She joined in 2015, and after doing the band for several years, solo, releasing a 7-inch and then a 10-inch and then a full length all by myself, I got to a place where I wanted to reimagine what the band could be, specifically in a live situation. And that's why the drums came in.
And then unfortunately COVID happens and you're not able to really do a lot of live experiences, which is like sad to the max.
Yeah, and just with that in mind, I just wanted to add it. And so I am doing some solo work now again, partially because of the fact that I'm now living in Europe. And
Andy is still living in the Northwest, isn't it?
Excuse me?
While Andy is still living in the Pacific Northwest, isn't it?
Andy lives in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, and you too. Sorry.
And he's really focusing at the moment on his recording studio and his band's there. You know, he's got a really active life there. And I'm really interested in pursuing solo work alongside Insect Ark and having it be under the name as a solo thing or as a duo or collaborating with other people perhaps in the future. I don't feel like that Insect Ark has to only be known as what is the most current thing, which is a duo, which is like a heavy duo band, because my interests are really in coming from a place of experimental music and, you know, weird 20th century composers or older composers or ambient music or noise or all these things. So it's an opportunity now for me to sort of show other facets of the project. Many people know of it as a sort of doom band, but that was not really my necessary intention. And so there'll be some surprises, I think, when people see what I'm doing on my own and what I'm releasing as these sort of solo releases.
When you say that you are, I just have to come back to that, when you say that you're interested in 20th century composers, could you name one or two that like are for you like inspirational?
Well, I think probably person whose music has made the biggest impact on me was Arvo Pärt.
Okay.
And I really stumbled on him completely by accident. And there's something about his sense of harmony and timing and space, particularly his smaller works, not the choral works and not the orchestral works, but the smaller instrumentations, trios, and things like that. It's so stunning to me, and it felt really familiar to me. And I think that using a palette that is something that I don't know why it really resonated with me. The minimalism of it and the beauty and the tonality of it.
That is something that I just wanted to mention. Like, it's very minimal compared to other 20th century composers, which is very interesting. We haven't mentioned the name. You've already mentioned it a lot, Insect Ark, which is the name of a project. But why Insect Ark? What is the idea behind the name?
Well, it's a bit of an abstraction, of course, but the idea is, in a loose terminology, that the insect part of it is that the insects are like the sounds and the songs or the pieces or the textures, and that they live inside of me. So in a way, I'm like the vessel or like an ark. So it's basically a comment on this chaos of sound and noise that goes on inside of me. So in a way, it's a bit goofy, but like in a way, I'm the insect ark. I'm holding it and I'm walking, because I go through life with these things that walking through my day, and they're driving me and they're going in circles in my head. So
okay, so you are like the speaker for the flight of the beast, to come back to classical 20th century music. Okay, interesting, very interesting. That is also something that I think that is something that a lot of artists on Consouling would say, that they are like just putting out the music that is around them. Interesting, very interesting. You've already mentioned that a lot of people have categorized Insect Ark because of the vanishing as some kind of doom band. I mean, apart from the fact that labels and genre are simply very often like completely unimportant. But can you see why people do that? And is it something that you are like okay with?
I'm okay with it in the sense that I would never want to dictate how somebody interprets anything artistic. The point should be is that you find things that speak to you, and maybe you use a genre tag to help you find similar things that you think you'll like. That if you're into, anything, then oh, well, if I go look at this category, then I'll have some new experiences. But I don't think of Insect Ark as a doom band, but of course I can understand why somebody would feel that way, because it's dark music, it's heavy, it's pretty slow. But there's no vocals, so that I can maybe push it one way or the other. But I think that doom is a tag that is a bit oversimplified, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like saying stoner or stoner rock or heavy metal, like, oh yeah, heavy metal band. Like, for people in the heavy music scene, of course, we know that, that's like something your grandparents would say, like, oh, well, my kid's into heavy metal. And you're like, oh, grandma, you don't know what you're talking about. But
it's grindcore, actually.
Yeah, actually, grandma, get with it. Yeah, so I feel like these terminologies, they leave out more info than they include from the people on the inside, where we really have a wider understanding of this. But I've never loved tags or genre names, and I honestly like to leave people guessing a little bit, but it's not intentional to be difficult or complicated or mysterious. It's just not how I think at all.
which also would in some way contradict your own idea of your band name, because if you say that you are just the vessel, just the ark, then how should the vessel and ark define the music around it? But when you say that you can understand people defining it as doom, are there any doom bands that you like? Do you have something like a favorite doom record?
Not specifically. I mean, of course, I do like the genre, and there's a lot of amazing. Like, I mean, I think like what's a somebody like Bell Witch, for example, is considered to be like really pinnacle of a
funeral doom, yeah.
And they're amazing. I mean, for me, like if I had a favorite doom record, I think maybe it hasn't been made. Like something like you take like a doo-wop record from the 50s and you slow it down 400%. You know?
Sounds like a very interesting idea.
I mean, yeah. Honestly, it sounds absurd, and I have been asked this before, and I've said it before because it's the truth, is that when I started Insect Ark, I wasn't really that familiar with the current doom scene. I knew of some of the bands just from the side, but I had come from being in a band for many years called Bee and Flower, and Bee and Flower was much more along the lines of something like Nick Cave or something. And I was really focused because that band took up a lot of my brain cells, and I was the vocalist and I was the songwriter and I was the bassist. And it wasn't that I was only listening to music like that, but music tends to take pretty much all of my available energy. So it wasn't that I was really that aware of things outside of what I was doing, if that makes any sense. And so when I started Insect Ark, I remember asking some people, saying like, well, what would you call this? Because initially it was me, a bass, a lap steel, a synthesizer, and programmed drums that I had done. And somebody said, oh, it's kind of like doom music. And I was like, oh, okay. I just didn't really make an immediate connection.
Yeah, and I think there is something about it that is just like, doom never goes away, so for some reason or other. You have already mentioned that you are also very much into experimental music and ambient. Do you see a connection between doom and ambient? Maybe the repetitiveness of the music?
Yeah, this was a little bit of a tricky question for me, but I will just say that I don't think of music in these terms of things being similar, because when there's a sensibility when you create something, you just follow it, right? So
without labeling it.
Without labeling it, and then I've never written a piece of music where I said, okay, well, let's see, this is kind of like a sort of ambient track, so just hang out on this one note for a while and just move a filter or something like that. Or same thing with a song, like, oh, well, it's doom music, so it can be really slow and I can just, just do a half step over and over, and that's going to be cool. So I think that writing for me becomes this moment of like a very intense, focused energy, and I just hear things and then I build them and I respond to them and I keep adding and subtracting and until I have something that I'm satisfied with.
So for the first 3 or 4 years, you've already mentioned Insect Ark was a solo project, and you've also mentioned that a lot of years before, like the years before, you had for a long time been in Bee and Flower. Was it a liberation to start your own project ever after having a band for such a long time?
Absolutely. That was the whole reason that I did it. When I had started Bee and Flower, it was in many ways an experiment for me to see if I could do it, because I had never really made a full effort to be a songwriter, a singer, a band leader, writing parts for other people and saying, this is the melody, this is the basic rhythm, this is the piano line, this could become a guitar part. And that was how that project started. And by the end, the people that I was playing with, we built something together, and then they had their own instincts and their own ideas. It became more of a mixture, but I was always the songwriter, and it was a lot of work to keep the band going. And at that point, we were on 2 continents, and it was just getting very difficult to schedule and plan, and the money wasn't there to fund traveling, and it just was really hard to keep that thing alive. So part of my frustration of just trying to get any work done and make records and hopefully tour, I thought, this is going to be really a limitation that I won't be able to get around. I need to find a way to do some music that's just for me and isn't going into it with an idea of what I didn't have to prove something to myself, which in many ways I didn't have anything to prove anything to anybody else, but Bee and Flower for me was to see, can I do this? Can I write nice vocal melodies over weird chord progressions? And can I make this music in a way? And we did it, and I'm really proud of those records, but from a sort of commercial, I don't want to say commercial, from a level of just being able to be a working band, it was not that successful. It could have been the timing, pre-social media in many ways, especially for most of it. And I just needed to do something for the love of sound. And so I started Insect Ark with the sole intention of just being alone and just seeing what happened, and checking to see if I could find new voices and new sounds. And so I started playing the lap steel guitar, and I started playing a lot more keyboards, and then of course the bass, which is my main instrument. So it was an important time of discovery when I started that, and I felt very free, freer than I had ever been, because as you mentioned before, I've played with a lot of people as well, and that is something that I really enjoy. And part of that is because I hopefully bring something to somebody else's music. Those are not always collaborative projects. So this idea that, okay, I'm going to just do something that is just for me, and I don't have to think about anything else. And so that, I think that's one of the reasons it came out so unusual.
Just for everybody who does not know what Dana says when she mentions that she's been collaborating with a lot of musicians. Dana has been collaborating with some of the biggest names in modern heavy music, be it Swans and Michael Gira, be it American Music Club with Mark Eitzel. I would include my friends in Arabrot for it, because I think they're on a very good path to becoming the next superstars. So don't always underestimate yourself. Trust your skills, because the things that you have already done are amazing. You just mentioned the bass, which is your main instrument, but did I get it correct that you learned the piano first?
No, actually, first I played flute when I was 9, because my mother played flute, so I copied her. Mm-hmm. And then at, I think, around 11, I started playing upright bass in school.
Okay, cool.
Bass. And then I took up electric bass at 16. And then I learned piano while I was taking some college classes. Mm-hmm. I was studying painting and music. So I was doing both the fine arts and the music. And it was when I moved to New York in 1997 that I started studying the piano.
So you've already mentioned all those instruments, and you've already mentioned the lap steel, which you are also using very frequently on Insect Ark records, and also on the records of other people. Um, would you say that you are some kind of musical autodidact multi-instrumentalist? Because I guess a lot of those did not come by going to classes and learning by a teacher, like, okay, this is a lap steel and this is how you use it.
Right. Yeah, I'm mostly self-taught in the sense that, you know, it would take some lessons maybe to get started with a few things, just enough to get a basic skill set. So anywhere from a few months or something. I did study with a piano teacher in New York City, probably for about a year, going like once every 2 weeks or something. And that was where I learned scale and basic harmony and things like that. But I had studied a little piano in college, just that was more theoretical than actual playing. I think I did take like 2 bass lessons back when some guy was like, yeah, you know, just hold down really hard and like, you know, you should learn to play with your fingers and a pick. And I was like, all right, cool. And I just went home and practiced the Bauhaus, you know, and then that's how I learned how to play bass. But lap steel, I studied with a guitar teacher in New York for a while, David First. And he's not a lap steel player, but he's a really skilled guitar player and a great artist. And so he sort of showed me a few things. And I did take some voice lessons when I started singing, because my voice was really bad when I started. So I wanted to learn some technique to try to get up to speed a little bit. So I guess then drumming, I had a drum kit in my old warehouse space, so I would kind of like, you know, come up with beats, and not very good, but being mostly a bass player, I can hear drum beats in my head, so I write these drum beats. So I would say I'm a combination of self-taught and some basic instruction.
So to learn all those instruments was also probably like a necessity, right? Because...
Well, very much so, yeah, because actually when I started the In Flower, I had a really specific instrumentation in mind. I wanted it to actually be bass, drums, pedal steel, and keyboards, piano. That was it, and vocals. And I was still living in San Francisco, my hometown, and I started making these demos. And I couldn't really explain to anybody what I wanted, so I had to learn enough of these things to make demos so that I could show by example. Not that, you know, writing a 3-note piano melody is something that you don't have to be a piano player to do that, but the idea is that I need to learn enough of all of those instruments so that I could document my ideas, and it was integral to my creative process of writing to be able to use those tools so that I could say, like, yes, you play one piano note for 4 measures and you just let it hang through. And so very much so, it was because I couldn't find other people who had those same sensibilities to help me make a band. So when I started that band, The In Flower, I had pretty complete demos with all the parts written, so I could show by example and say, this is kind of the sound, this is the feel that I'm looking for. And I definitely needed to know how to do those things.
So you've spoken about writing for Bee and Flower, and you've also spoken about the fact that, once again, you're in a band or project that is on 2 different continents right now. And you've also mentioned that you like to pursue Insect Ark into a different direction. So how must I envision your process of writing now? Do you write alone, or do you still send Andy some stuff, or how is that going on?
I almost have exclusively always worked alone to get started. That's not to say that I mean, absolutely. There's been times where I've said, okay, here's a part, you know, what can we do with this? In all the projects that I've written music for, there's a thing where I have to discover what I'm after before I can show it to somebody else. And this is a really important part of the process. And so in that sense, Insect Ark, for example, is really still my project. And it will always probably be filtered through my own ideas of what I'm after. That's been the experience so far. So,
very interesting.
not that I want to pursue a different direction for Insect Ark. I just want to have the flexibility to continue making new work in whatever direction is needed. So right now, as we know, because of COVID and because of everything, there's a lot of uncertainty. So I'm putting together a lot of new music, which is just me, so that I can have a smaller footprint and I can be able to still perform without having a big operation that's really unwieldy and has a lot of technical requirements. I can travel on my own with some difficulty, but alone, you know, on a train if I have to, even if I'm doing solo work, and that's just impossible.
So indirectly, you've already hinted at it. How will the live performances of Insect Ark go on? Will it really just be you on stage, or will there also be other people on stage?
Well, traditionally, and in the past, when it's been a solo show, it's just me. Mm-hmm. So it's not solo in the sense that, yeah, I wrote it and here's my solo band. It's solo in the sense that it's a one-person show and it's a one-person operation. So that's what I'm preparing right now, is for solo work. So that if, you know, an opportunity comes up where there isn't the budget or the space or whatever the case may be, if somebody wants me to perform in an art gallery, but can't have a drum kit, or I really like writing solo. I think I'm at a good place to do some more of that work right now. And I think that certainly with the world how it is, you know, if you want to be able to keep working, you have to be really flexible. So this is really important for me to have a more concise and sort of tighter operation. I am, of course, concerned and nervous about what will happen to the music community and the performing world, where people used to come together, and that's going to be harder and harder. So, but it's really crucial for me that I keep making work and that I find ways to just plow forward. And I really miss performing. So this seemed like a really good time to pursue.
It's interesting that you say that you miss performing, because a lot of people that I've talked to would always say, like, performing is always in a group, but you seem to be I don't want to use the term, but I think it's a pretty good one of those independent spirits who do not need the affirmation of another band member. Mm. So in order to say, like, okay, that was a good performance or that was a bad performance.
I mean, I've done both, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I am definitely very independent. That's been a benefit and a drawback many times in many different phases of my life. Ideas they just come to me, and I just am documenting them. And maybe that sounds very oversimplified, but the performance aspect is a way to realize them and set the ideas free into the world, because I don't want to just sit in a room by myself and write stuff, even though the writing process is really enjoyable for me. In some ways, it's one of the most fun, because you get these moments of exploration that are really, they're solitary, but they are really exciting. And when I have enough of that kind of work and there's an opportunity to share it with people, hopefully it's going to translate and that somebody else will also feel the impact of this work. And I know that my life has been impacted in a really positive way through music that people have made that has completely changed everything about my perspective just from hearing something or seeing something. And this would be the ultimate goal, is that you can bring something to somebody and that they can maybe make their own experience from it. It doesn't have to be your experience, but that you're bringing them something and it's like a transportation.
When you say that you have had those kind of life experience, could you also pinpoint one of those which were like really influential to you, which, for example, changed some of your ideas about music or life? Where you seen a band or a performer on stage and it was like, okay, that is something different.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of them. I wish there was a recent one. I haven't seen any concerts in so long.
Yes.
Yeah, let's see. I guess maybe when I saw, well, certainly when I saw Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds the first time, this was, because I was such a huge fan. I saw them the first time in the 90s, and this was like the golden era for me. The band was amazing. And this was one of many, and many experiences like this. Even just hearing something actually has changed me. Like I said, this Arvo Pärt, this Tabula Rasa album, that music just stops me in my tracks. Like the whole world just goes away when I hear that, and it still has that same effect on me. That's really powerful. And it's a really ambitious idea, but this is what I would hope to do with music, is to make something that is so powerful, not necessarily through volume or intensity, but just the spirit of it is somehow so intense that it captures people, and that they're just like in a vortex, or like the eye of the hurricane, like that everything else just drops away. And of course that is, that's a very, it's a really ambitious idea, but that's what music does for me. And that's the spirit that has driven me this whole time throughout my whole life, of wanting to create something.
Also indirectly, that probably subconsciously and without thinking about it, you chose a solo artist supported by his band and the Bad Seeds.
Do you think of them that way though? Because I think that band was...
apart from the fact that, of course, the Bad Seeds was like probably the only non-ever defined supergroup.
Yeah, true.
Or maybe the band which turned all other groups of band members into supergroups.
Yeah.
I would still say that a lot of the mystique around it is just this voice, which seems like a combination of Lucifer and God. The one time that I saw him, it was also, just like you said, mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And that was without the Bad Seeds, so it was more recent.
Okay.
And it was still blowing away. And I think that, although, of course, the music on those records, everything until, I would say, and No More Shall We Part, up to that, everything up to there is like perfection, in whichever genre you want to put it in, but it's perfect. But I think a lot of it has to do with that voice.
It's so interesting, because I feel like, of course, a lot of it has to do with the voice and the songwriting and et cetera, but for me, that band, particularly the era that I saw it, I wish I could remember the year, but it was shortly after I moved to New York, so it was the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s. So that they were really on fire, the people that were in the band at that time. And for me, each member of the band had such a special thing that they brought that was really their own. And it was the combination of all of these elements together. Not one of those people was replaceable in my mind. And this is me coming to it from the sort of musician side of it, not from the band leader side, saying like, man, the way he plays the drums, that bass line, that keyboard line, that guitar part that Lexo's playing or that Nick Harvey's playing or something like that, like each element was like, it was perfection. So, yeah.
But I only have two more questions for you. If you were able to cover any song from any band, either alone or in a kind of band constellation that you could also wish for, would you have like a song that you would like to cover? With or without the help of other people?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I've never actually done cover songs.
I know, that's why I ask.
Yeah.
Because it's so unusual for artists, because I think like nearly every artist, even Nick Cave, has a lot of covers. And you're one of the few. I mean, like, I'm a cover nerd, so I looked it up and that's like, Dana never recorded a cover.
Actually, but you know what's interesting is that Bee and Flower, we did a version of the Stooges song Anne. You know that song?
But you as Insect Ark never did a cover.
No, but we never released that either.
Okay.
It was good. I don't know why we didn't. Well, no, Insect Ark has not done a cover. I thought about it, but part of it has always been a technical problem, because Insect Ark being at most two people and me really handling all of the stringed and keyboardy instruments, I would have to sing. Because I can only, I mean, I can do a lot of really technical live looping now. I have this pretty complicated setup where I can stack instruments. I can stack a textural lap steel little cloudy thing in a certain key, and then I'll add a bass line on top of that, and I can loop that, and I can add a keyboard, and that is what I do live. But from a cover song standpoint, that would be pretty difficult. So it would have to be very, very different, obviously, which is fine. I don't feel like cover songs have to be, true to the original. But one cover song that I learned back when I was learning bass is I learned to transcribe Halo of Flies by Alice Cooper. So I don't know if you know that song, but it's a really great bass line. And I was like, that I'm going to learn. But I think that's maybe the only time I ever did something like that.
Okay.
But a cover song, I mean, it would probably be like a Motown song or something, like a Otis Redding song or something like that. Something just like really sad and beautiful and heartfelt, or like Bill Withers or something. I mean, I actually really love that music a lot. It's something that's like old soul music.
Is that something that you grew up with?
Not so much, no. I grew up listening to British heavy metal and new wave. No,
I mean your parents.
Oh, my parents. My parents would play. No, my parents were like your sort of typical, beatniks. Like there was a lot of Beatles, White Album, Stones, stuff like that.
So that was if you had to choose to do a cover on your own. If anybody ever, or no, let's put it simply, like who would you like to cover an Insect Ark song?
I would have to say Brian Eno.
Ooh.
Because I think he would. I'd be interesting to see his process of distillation. Distillation, is that a word? Of distilling because this goes through somebody else's head. What do they hear? What stands out to them?
What does he keep?
Yeah, what do you keep? What do you throw away? So, yeah.
It's always interesting. Dana, thank you so much for doing this. I hope the questions were not too bad, and I hope that you had a good time. Thank you very much, and enjoy your time in Vienna at the moment, right?
I'm in Vienna currently, yes.
So enjoy Vienna. Go to Sacher.
Go to what?
So thanks a lot.